I want to welcome you all to this discussion on the state of the natural and organic product industry. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Justine Roberts. I work at the Center for Ethics and Social Responsibility at the Leeds School of Business. We start every program here at CESR with a land acknowledgement. As we gather, we believe in recognizing that the lands where we live and work are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Lakota, Pueblo, and Shoshone nations. Further, there are 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that comprise what is now Colorado. And it's my great pleasure to turn this over to Joe. I'm going to let him introduce himself, but I do want to set it up by saying that if you don't know him, Joe is the former head of marketing for Whole Foods and Sprouts. He's a published author on the history of the natural food movement, and he runs graduate programs for students in this field. So he's really, we're in excellent hands. Okay, I'm going to put myself on mute. Joe, take it away.
Oh, thank you, Justine. You know, one of the nice things about Zoom is that the camera resolution is never so good that you can see people blush. So I appreciate the introduction. It's really good to see so many familiar names and faces here. Some students who are in my class this semester, some who've been in the past, quite a few of you who have been part of MBark, either as executives or as participants from around the country. It's great. And it just reinforces for me that as big as this industry is, and it's approaching $300 billion at this point, it's still a small community, and it's an unusual one in that it's extremely cooperative. I've heard so many stories about people who were seeking jobs, and maybe they were walking around the floor of Expo West talking to, let's say, Annie's Naturals, and they're told, you know, you're really good. We don't have a position for you, but let me walk you over to my competitor because they do. That sort of thing happens in this industry. It always has. It's part of the cultural roots of the natural and organic industry. And it's one of the reasons that I like to refer to it as the most purpose-centric industry on the planet. So I'm glad that we're all gathered here. We'll have a chance to kick around some ideas and talk about the employment prospects, talk about what's happening in the JEDI world, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and also reflect a little bit on how the pandemic has impacted the industry. A quick starting point for you, and those of you who've been through my presentations at MBark or even in my class are familiar with this, but it's important to set the context for why this industry is different. And I start that with a quotation from 1972, and this is from a guy named Dr. Frederick Stare. Dr. Stare was the founder and the longtime chairman of Harvard's Department of Nutrition. I mean, it's the bastion of higher education on the banks of the Charles River. And so certainly if anybody was going to understand the world of nutrition and food, it was going to be Dr. Stare. And he said in an article in Harper's Bazaar in 1972, all foods are composed of chemicals. You and I are composed of chemicals, and strictly speaking, all foods are organic. Okay. A second quotation is from Emmanuel Faber, who is the global CEO of Danone, based in Europe. And he had one of the more insightful and prescient quotes that I've read in recent years talking about what's happening in the food industry. He wrote, "The global industrial food system is reaching its limits. Everywhere, people want to regain control over their food. A revolution is cooking. So what are we going to do about it? We, talking about Danone, we are losing millennials. They are getting out of our shops, out of our brands. They are going for food without the food industry. And not only without us, but maybe against us." Very insightful. And then the third quote, which is my favorite of all. Most of you have heard me spout this if you haven't read it yourself in Gary Hirschberg's book, Stirring It Up. But Gary, the chairman of Stonyfield Farm, said, "It's going to take a lot more than moral rectitude and virtuous principles to set us on a truly sustainable path. Business is the most powerful force on the planet. It got us into this mess and is the only force strong enough to get us out." So with that, I want to turn this over to our four remaining panelists and have them do a very quick introduction so that you understand who they are and be able to direct your questions to them. And let's start with you, Steve Hoffman.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Justine, for including me on this panel, and Joe. And it's a pleasure to virtually meet this class and see some of my colleagues and friends. I've been involved in natural and organic products industry since 1985, food and agriculture actually since 1978. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got out of college, and I, in that last semester of panic of like, what the heck is next, I actually met a gentleman who had returned from the Peace Corps. I was intrigued. I went to Penn State. I went to the Peace Corps volunteer office. Before I knew it, I ended up in Honduras, teaching agriculture and education in what they called a rural pilot school way back in the countryside of Honduras, where I learned a whole lot more than I taught. But coming back to the States, I actually did go into a graduate program, but for agriculture and entomology of all things. And I ended up being an extension agent, but I didn't ride a Jeep. I drove around in an old Volkswagen in Philadelphia, putting in urban gardens in North Philadelphia, which was a very low income area. Ended up being a bit of a second Peace Corps service in that I worked with the Puerto Rican population. And we would turn and convert blown out city lots into these beautiful neighborhood gardens that people would hang out in. And we ended up putting in about 125 gardens in 2.5 years. And then I met folks from a company called New Hope Natural Media. You may know them from being in Boulder now. But at the time, they were in New Hope, Pennsylvania. Not many people know that's where the name comes from. It's a little town right on the Delaware River. So that's how I got to Boulder, and I worked in their trade magazine publishing division, worked in programming with Natural Products Expos, where I very early on in 1985 met Mark Retzloff, who took me under his wing. I interviewed him a lot for articles. He educated me a lot about the marketplace. So Mark's been a mentor of mine. And that's something that I know he believes, and I believe it's something you pay forward. So mentoring is important in the natural products marketplace. Anyway, I've worked for a number of manufacturers, trade shows, conferences that I've either founded or helped produce. Currently, I'm about 15 years into a PR and marketing agency. It's a boutique agency. We're small but little, but mighty. And we specialize in natural, organic, regenerative, and hemp products. We actually are going to venture forth at the National Western Complex down in Denver with the NOCO, which stands for Northern Colorado, NOCO, the NOCO Hemp Expo, which prior to this past year was the largest hemp trade show and conference in the world. We do have Governor Polis booked to speak. We're doing it in a mix of virtual and in person down at the Western Complex, but there's so much space down there that it'll be interesting, Mark, to see the future of trade shows. This will be socially distanced booths. But in a way, it's to try to serve the market that got preempted last year. And like New Hope, which has also moved Expo West, the largest natural products trade show in the world, to virtual again, second year in a row. And that hurts financially. But they are looking forward to a Philadelphia show in September. And as likely as well, my hemp client is looking forward to a show in Raleigh, North Carolina in September, as well. As you may know, of course, the trade show and conference business got hit very, very hard in the pandemic. So it's going to be a gentle return but we're going to venture forth, and you can find out a little more about it at nocohempexpo.com. The hemp marketplace.
Steve, let me actually, we'll get back to that part. I want to get through the other introductions, and then we can get into our program here.
By all means, Joe. My apologies.
No problem at all. Megan, why don't you introduce yourself as our second panelist?
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Justine, for having me as well. Looking forward to chatting with you all today. My name is Megan Bendt. I'm founder and managing partner at Harbinger Ventures. I suppose I sit on the dark side of the natural products industry and in the growth equity world. I've spent most of the last 15 years pairing capital and strategy and deploying that into founder-led organizations that are focused on big consumer opportunities and need states. We're not exclusively focused on natural and organic products, but we continue to find it's where so much of the opportunity is. You know, the consumer is leading these brands towards better ingredients, better sourcing, better transparency, better treatment of employees. And as good stewards of capital and seekers of innovation, we follow the consumer. Today, we have a handful of natural and organic brands in our portfolio. We have on the food and beverage side, brands like Once Upon a Farm and Miss Jones Baking Co. and Nona Lim, Fourth and Heart. On the personal care side, we have Cora and Fresh Monster, Vitruvi and Home Fragrance. We have a wine brand that's clean and natural as well. And so we're sort of big believers in the fundamentals of this industry and try to serve it from the point of the capital markets.
Fabulous. Thank you. Love having you here. Love that perspective. That's not the dark side at all. Ibrahim, welcome.
Hey, how are you guys? I'll echo everyone else and just thank you guys for including me. My name's Ibrahim Basir. I'm the founder and CEO of A Dozen Cousins. We're a natural food brand that makes a line of ready-to-eat side dishes, all fully cooked and seasoned and inspired by traditional Creole, Caribbean, and Latin American foods. I started my career in the food industry before I started my own company, initially at General Mills, slowly working my way through their natural and organic portfolio. I've spent time on Larabar, on Annie's Organic, based out of Berkeley, and also have my MBA from the Wharton School of Business. So I was in many of your guys' shoes not that long ago, and excited to connect with you all.
Great. Certainly one of the more interesting and fast-rising brands, A Dozen Cousins. If you're not familiar with it, I'm sure Ibrahim will tell you a little bit more, but please go and check them out as well. And a little closer to home, a Leeds MBA grad himself, David Winter.
Hey everybody, glad to be here. And again, thanks for including me. Yeah, I am MBA 09. So glad to be here and talking with some folks in a similar bucket. I am currently at a company called Spins. We do data and analytics, specifically focused on the natural foods industry. Spins has been around since 1995, but kind of still a little bit in that entrepreneurial space, you know, still growing amongst a couple of behemoths that kind of play alongside us in IRI and Nielsen. I've been there for 9 years. I currently run sales for our ventures division, which basically seeks to deploy applications that sit on top of all the assets that we have. So we've got a lot of data in the background, and besides just spitting out data reports, there are a bunch of other cool things that you can do with it. For example, we run a brand called Destiny with an I at the end. And if you were to go to destiny.co, you would see we do store locators and digital coupons and all sorts of stuff that kind of play around the edges of that space. I got my start in 2003 at a retailer that used to be in Boulder called Wild Oats. And so, yeah, I'm super happy to be here and chat with you all today.
Great, thrilled to have you here. It is also worth mentioning that among our crowd here, we've got Mark Retzloff, one of the real pioneers in the industry, joining us from his home in Hawaii, founder of Horizon Organic and Aurora Organic Dairy, and former CEO of Rudy's and many other natural brands, advisor to so many of us throughout the last 50 years in his time in the industry. Not a panelist. Mark's just joining us to listen in and contribute where he might be able to. Julie Zager is my partner from Naturally Boulder, is filling our chat column here with all of the links that you would need. Thank you, Julie, for everything that you're contributing. Heather Kennedy, who, like me, had spent quite a few years as the head of national marketing at Whole Foods and as a professor at CU. I see has joined us as well. So we've got some really good resources here for you. Real briefly, because our time is going to be curtailed today because we ended up starting late. Everybody got a bit of a late start today. So Steve, if you could give us like a little 2-minute, 3-minute summation, I would just love to hear your perspective on where we are relative to the pandemic in this industry, right? Most of the people on this call are interested in going into this industry or working somehow in affiliation with this industry. And the big question on everybody's minds that we're going to get to is, how's the industry doing and what are the employment prospects? But you've got such an overarching view. I wonder if you could just, again, real briefly, give us some sense for how you think this industry has fared through the pandemic.
Thank you, Joe. Actually, as Tony Antocci, the owner, not the founder, but the owner of Erewhon Markets in Los Angeles told me back in May, it's a good time to be in the grocery business. Believe it or not, we used to spend 50% of our food dollars out in restaurants, fast food, lunches, outside of the home, outside of grocery stores. When restaurants really just completely shut down with the lockdown in the middle of March, all that business and all the institutional food, everything shifted over to grocery. So that's why you kind of saw some of those scenes early on of farmers dumping milk. It was destined for the food service market or the institutional market, and they couldn't adjust the distribution channels in time. Frankly, over the course of time, I've been tracking this with a series of articles. If you go to New Hope Network and their idea exchange, you look me up, you'll see a series of articles. We realized this is historic. And suddenly all that food dollar purchase, everything shifted to the grocery stores. It's why you saw, half of the toilet paper that we use is outside of the home. Suddenly all the toilet paper we're using, bath tissue, is in the home, which is why it wasn't on the shelves all that time. I think now you go into stores and grocery stores and you will see a lot more in stock, but still supply chain is a challenge during the pandemic. And it has shown the stress of a system when you grow shrimp in Thailand and ship it to Boston for packing and then to the warehouse in Dallas to get distributed over here. There, I think it's really compelling the food industry to make some important shifts. And in covering the story, what we saw was that actually the food industry has demonstrated a lot of resilience through this. The big companies had a hard time just filling orders. They first saw their warehouses like going empty. If you were a pasta company or a bean company, people were pantry loading. Now I think you're seeing more in stock. Now you're seeing people turn toward immunity, building immunity. Supplement sales, which dropped, are now increasing. Hemp and CBD sales took a big drop in the beginning. It wasn't important and it's expensive, but now I think people are starting to turn back to it because they're looking at immunity, anxiety, sleep, stress, pain. So everyone here, all my co-panelists who've been in the natural products industry will agree that this message that the natural and organic products industry has been saying for years and years repeatedly, because education has driven sales in this marketplace, is, health starts with what you put in your body, on your body, and what you put your body in. I think that's become ever more important during the pandemic. And still, while there's a lot of disruption in the marketplace, the young companies are trying to figure it out. You're seeing a lot of native online sellers emerge online. The shift to online is accelerated 5 years in the past year. So there is opportunity out there. And I think that as we emerge from this pandemic, it could be a really great time to get involved in the natural, organic, regenerative, which is really important because that's where food hits climate change, and the hemp marketplaces. Well, thank you, Joe. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Great. No, I appreciate that. Ibrahim, you mentioned you're a Wharton grad. We've got a number of MBA and grad students here. I wonder whether you could sort of reflect a little bit on whether you think that this industry is still a good destination, a good target for that crowd, given their training, but also given their debt levels and their need for compensation, and what you have seen in your company in terms of the current trends on hiring. And I'm going to ask that same question of David and Megan as well. But let's start off with you, Ibrahim.
Yeah, I'll start, and I want to caveat this by saying this is really my experience. Like, I haven't done, research or a data dive on some of these points, so take it as such. I started my career at a very big company, and then actually kind of moved down the company scale size as I progressed, obviously getting to a point where, I started my company by myself, right? And so, I think I'll lay out some of the tensions and some of the choices that I think you'll need to make, and maybe just help frame it up for you guys to think about it, right? I do think early in your career, there is this, if you go to a large company, you're surrounded by expertise. You have a lot of internal mentors. You have people who can teach you things, whether that's formal training, people who have done it before, et cetera. Whereas smaller companies, you're usually learning on the job, right? And so maybe one thing to consider is the question of, like, are you the type of person who wants to sit in a seminar, then do the thing, then have someone check it for you, and then, do it again the next week? If so, probably a very small emerging company may or may not be the right environment, right? Now, what I'll say is that within the natural product world, of course, there's a wide range of companies and company sizes, right? And so I don't necessarily think that that's an indictment on joining the industry as much as it is just you want to think about the level of structure you want and need at this stage of your career versus the size of company that you're going into. So that'll be kind of the first comment I'll make. And then the second comment around compensation, on average, I don't know how salaries compare, but I think it's going to be a very similar trade-off, right? Where small resource-strapped companies won't be able to offer you a 401k or a retirement or, unlimited vacation or free gym pass or, many of the things that you get at a large company. And so again, I think just an important trade-off to consider is, where are you at from what you need to do, from a compensation perspective? Are you in learning mode and growth mode, or are you in a mode where you need to get paid? And again, I think either of them is fine. You just need to be really self-aware about what you're looking for at that stage. And then the last thing I'll say, and this is just, a pet thought of mine, like in general, I encourage MBAs to optimize for experience and networking, right? As I look back in those early years, am I doing the exact same stuff? No, but I was able to build a really cool skill set. I got to meet a ton of people in the industry. I got to really explore my passions in a way that I thought was very valuable. And so, you're probably not going to be doing whatever job you take after business school for more than 3 or 4 years. I think the data would support that. And so if you think about it in that way, it's like, how do you want to fill up your toolkit, as you build your career? So hopefully that's useful thoughts. But again, just a few things top of mind for me as a former MBA.
And Ibrahim, have you continued to hire during the pandemic, or did you guys put a freeze on?
Well, we're a very lean team. So most of our team was outsourced pre-pandemic, and it continues to be the case, right? We use contract manufacturing. We have outsourced bookkeeping and accounting. We have a part-time social media manager, right? Like we're still very much in the early part of that growth phase where it's like, hey, what can we outsource? What can we fulfill part-time before we get into full-time hires? We actually made our first full-time hire last month, so post-pandemic, which was a sales role. And we have plans to hire about 4 more folks this year. So, as I think Steve alluded to early on, we've been in the fortunate group of folks that the pandemic has been a net benefit to our business. I think people have been eating more beans than probably they ever have for the most part. And so we're in a position where we kind of continue on that growth path.
Super. Megan, what have you seen in terms of your portfolio companies, but within Harbinger itself? Same question. Or is this still a great industry for undergraduates and MBA students to be targeting right now? Is hiring happening? Is it sort of stuck in the mud? How do you see it?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I'll start on a real note and then end on a positive note. The real is that most companies did freeze, starting in Q2, maybe going into Q3. They needed to preserve their cash, right, and their survival. And small natural products companies, even big companies, were really focused on the fundamentals, staying in stock, not running out of money, figuring out where the consumer's going. And it was hard to make long-term bets behind that. That's definitely changing. I would say headed into this year, there's increasing clarity, particularly behind the businesses that benefited from COVID around, this is the time to lean in. This is the time to protect and defend the benefit that I accrued last year, to go faster. And that requires human resources for sure, and strategic human resources, people that have experience they can bring to the table, who are really athletic, who are willing to wear multiple hats. And so from that perspective, it's a good hiring market. I will say people in good jobs aren't necessarily leaving them. And so what that does create is opportunity for you all to jump in and say, I may not have done this before, but I'm ready to do it for a first time. You don't need an experienced head of marketing. You just need a great MBA that can do everything. And so refining your pitch around sort of what you bring to the table, your enthusiasm, your background, the multiple hats you're willing to wear is a great way to get into those early stage companies that really need the capacity. The other areas where there's opportunities to get into the natural products industry that's really exploded over the last 10 years is on sort of the outsourced side of the equation. Ibrahim mentioned this. We have many companies that are working with outsourced CFO shops, Stage One, Propeller, that have an army of great advisors on the financial side. Those teams are growing really fast. Same thing if you think about variable manufacturing strategies or outsourced sales and marketing strategies. And so when you think about the natural products industry, think beyond the brand, think into the support structure. Those are really valuable ways in. And to Ibrahim's point, you're not stuck in those funnels forever. There's still paths back to the company side if you want. And then my last comment is, most small companies that are successful grow into big companies. And as they do, they recruit from large CPG companies where the training is excellent, where the network is really well developed, where they come with a Rolodex. And so there is no shame in going to work for Clorox and selling wipes for 2 to 3 years and getting that great brand management training or P&L training. Most of our top C-suite executives started in those big companies, sort of learned on the ropes and migrated to the small companies over time.
That's a fascinating perspective. I think Mark and Steve would agree, and I certainly wrote quite a few stories about this in Natural Profits, that was not the case for a long time. There was shame in it. For many years, the feeling was if you're in the natural products arena, you don't want to hire anybody who's coming from the conventional arena because they had conventional brains and conventional training, and they were, too much bookish wisdom, too many HP 12C calculators, too many bean counters. Not the case anymore. And in fact, you heard this now from both Ibrahim and from Megan. This is a much more common and embraced path. Doesn't mean you have to go work for General Mills or one of the big guys first, but it's certainly an open path to you. Now, you mentioned support services, Megan, and I want to ask that to David, because SPINS is sort of the ultimate support service for the natural products industry. So same question to you, sort of as you put yourself in the shoes of the people who are on our call here, thinking about trying to break into the industry or redirect your pre-grad school career into this industry. Does it feel like this is a good time and a good place for it? And maybe give a little bit of that perspective from SPINS and the support services side.
Sure. Yeah, it's certainly a good time. In my opinion, if you are passionate about natural foods, it's always a good time to look for a job in natural foods, because it is a really, really mission-driven industry. And it sounds a little trite to say that sort of stuff, but my kind of number one overriding thing that I would think about is figure out where your passion lies. Is it an entrepreneurial sort of passion? Is it a, are you really passionate about finance? Are you passionate about sales? Are you passionate about retail? There are all sorts of things that you might be interested in that don't necessarily kind of limit you to a natural food sort of space, but could have some overlap there, and it could be a good place to look. But there might be all sorts of ancillary sorts of industries that might be interesting too, right? So if you are interested in ecological causes, natural foods certainly could play into that. But maybe you should also be looking at the outdoor industry, right? Which is also booming in Colorado. And so I would just encourage you to think narrowly about what you like to do and what motivates you, but think broadly about how that kind of plays to an industry. And just to show you some of the kind of indirect stuff that can happen, when I graduated, I did hourly consulting for Earth Balance, Smart Balance, which at the time was just a tiny little office up in Niwot. I was watering Steve Hughes's plants in between running Whole Foods reports, right? While doing that, I was interacting with their international distributors. So they worked with a company called Magnolia Trading that handled all of their business outside of the US, and eventually got hired as the sales operations manager at Magnolia Trading, a company I had never heard of, an industry I had no experience in, international distribution. And while I was there, and I loved that job for a year and a half, I ran sales ops there. And then I got a call from an old colleague, Beata, who I had worked with at Wild Oats. And she had just begun a new adventure with a startup. She was the 4th employee at a company called Data Garden, which was doing analytics for Whole Foods. And I ended up going over there. And that's really where kind of all of my passions started to come together: sales, operations, analytics. And so it was a totally nonlinear path for me to figure out what that kind of niche was for me personally, but just being open to different opportunities in different roles. I think, you know, all of that stuff, as long as you can figure out how it plays to your strengths a little bit, being open is, you know, usually a good thing, especially in this industry.
Thank you, David. That's great perspective for us. I love the notion that if you're passionate about it, it's always a good time. I've always said that I think the single most important job requirement for this industry is passion. And I think the entrepreneurs in the industry recognize that more so than what school you got your degree from, or what your training was, or even what your experience is. If you come to them with that fire in your eyes and the passion for the business, they will gravitate to you. Speaking of entrepreneurs, so Danielle sort of raised this question. I'm glad you did. So we might as well ask that right now. What about those who want to go and start their own businesses, want to be entrepreneurs? Is this a good time for that? Megan, let me throw that question to you first. So you certainly see a lot of early stage companies who are looking for funding and trying to find their way into the industry. What advice would you give to the prospective entrepreneurs? Good time, bad time?
Yeah, so it's a complicated question. I mean, I would say if you have the passion, it's always a good time. If I'm going to steal David's advice here, I heard a saying today: pandemrenaissance. Coming out of this pandemic, there's going to be a huge renaissance of innovation. Right? You have been trapped in your home, and that sort of creates ideation. It creates innovation. It creates solutions. So out of great crisis come great opportunities. And if that's sort of an idea that you've been struck with and you can't let go on, then it's absolutely the right time to lean in, because there is no greater time to launch innovation than sort of following a period of crisis, for a couple of reasons. One is this is exactly the moment when sort of the largest players in the industry, whether it's Target or Whole Foods or Procter & Gamble, have prioritized SKU consolidation, bottom line profitability, operational simplicity. And in order to do that, they've cut out innovation. And so you imagine 24 months later, they sort of wake up and think, we're missing out on some big trends here. We have the EBITDA, we don't have the growth, we lost the consumer, we better hustle. And so if you're sort of building into that opportunity, it's a great time. On the flip side, it is a very tricky time to launch into retail for the reasons I just mentioned. They are, sort of the openness to more complexity, taking on new brands, your ability to get end caps, your ability to demo in store, open up at the farmer's market. A lot of those channels aren't available right now, but if you've got creativity and you know how to work on the direct response side, you know how to access digital channels, you know how to create a social network where you can build excitement and awareness and your product works in that way, you can work your way right around that and sort of create your own advantage. So I would say if you have the passion, if you have the idea, you should certainly lean in and then rip up the playbook that worked for all of your entrepreneurial network over the last 10 years and just start from scratch, because it is a very unique go-to-market time right now.
Other thoughts on that question from our other panelists?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add two quick nuggets. The first, I would say, like, if you just think about your opportunity cost as an entrepreneur, it's about as low right now as it will ever be, right? Fresh out of school. Obviously, you guys come from different backgrounds in terms of whether you have kids or families or things of that nature, but it's generally a good time to do it just because what's the risk, right? That you get back on the job market 1 or 2 years from now, you're not that far off from where you are today, right? So that would be the one other bullet I would add. And then the second thing, just to like, I don't know what the word for triple piggybacking something, but I'll just add to this idea of like, if you have an idea that you're passionate about and that you think will be viable in the marketplace, it kind of doesn't matter what else is going on, right? The question just becomes, how do you bring it to the world? How fast is your pace of growth? Do you start in retail versus e-commerce? So on and so forth, right? Like all those things are considerations, but like all good businesses, of course, start from like a consumer need, a gap in the marketplace. And so if that's there, you should go and try to figure it out.
Great, thanks, Ibrahim.
And what's cool, just one final thought, is in this day and age, in the last few months of your MBA, put up a Shopify site, right? Get a Squarespace page up, play around with what it's like to build a brand and, build some content and see if people are engaging with it. You don't even need a product, right? You just need to sort of put the idea out into the universe and talk about it and see what consumers respond. So, to that idea of barriers to entry for entrepreneurs, there's so many resources available off the shelf that you can really sort of, Google exit and get something up quickly and just see if it resonates and what it feels like to sort of put that, into the world and have consumers judge you on it. It's a great way to test if that's something you truly love.
Yeah, or, approach CESR, talk to Julie, talk to Sarah, talk to Justine, see if they've got some ideas for how you might be able to take your idea and sort of test market it at CU in your environment through the auspices of CESR. Who knows? It might be something interesting there. Same vein though, and I want to open this up. Maybe Mark, you could comment as well, or Steve. What's the state? And Megan obviously can weigh in on this too. What is the state of funding and financing? I mean, Mark, you've been out there trying to shake the trees and raise money for Flock during the course of the pandemic, and it has not been easy. If you were one of the people on our call who was thinking about becoming an entrepreneur in this industry and you needed to raise some funds, what advice do you give to them coming off of this pandemic experience?
Well, I think that you have to have something that's compelling today, just because there's so much uncertainty out there. People are really, looking for ideas. They're always looking for new ideas, but the uncertainty is something that dampens that somewhat about, where the market is going to be. For example, how much has the marketplace changed in the last year for where the consumer looks for products? Okay. We've seen it significantly, some of it's moved to online, but, some of it's moved to delivery from bricks and mortar, okay, all sorts of things. We are getting food, okay, and it's being consumed. And there's a lot of problems out there with supply chain. So I would work on, I would look in that area, particularly from big data and digitally, and how that can support a lot of ways of getting products from everywhere throughout the world. But specifically, Joe, I think we're really moving into an era of collaboration. And that is going to be very important. People are, and I think part of that in that collaboration is authenticity. So, and I think that's really being driven by the millennial and younger out there. They see the world differently than certainly my generation looks at the world today. They see the future differently than I looked at the future at their stage in their careers today. The uncertainty and so on and so forth, huge problems that we have out in the world with population, with climate change, with justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, all sorts of things out there. So all of that, I mean, you have to kind of take where the world is today and where we think it's going to be in the future, and know that we're going to have a period of transition in the next decade. We either get it together or we suffer together, okay, on what the world is going to be. And, you know, my hope is that the folks on this call and others that are the young people are going to step forward and bring about the change that we need out there in the world. Yeah, I want to go back on one comment that was made earlier, and that is a couple things about the relationship between young entrepreneurs and big CPG companies. Okay. I never went to any of the big CPG companies, you know, or any of that. It's always entrepreneur, finding something I think was the thing to do and just making it happen. But I learned an awful lot by selling to the big CPGs, okay? Because I had to be able to understand what their problems that they were trying to solve and how I could be of utility to them in solving those problems with either my products or with the kind of things that I was trying to, or reaching to certain consumers that they could not reach. So, and that's what I kind of base my career on, is listening to consumers and then going out and taking those ideas and putting them to use, putting them into executing on them, putting them into something that the consumer would buy. One final thing I'd like to say is, and David does this regularly, you have to listen to the consumer. You must listen to the consumer. I loved being in retail for 20 years because every day I would spend time down on that floor talking to consumers, seeing what was being sold, seeing the way they, just standing back and watching the way they looked at products and how they have picked them up and how they did that. All that was trying to understand what their behavior and what was motivating them. And I would go up and talk with them, okay? If you don't know your customer, how's your product ever going to be, how are you ever going to design your product and put it together for people to purchase? So you must do that. And there's many ways of sources of information today, much more than there was 50 years ago when I got into this industry. And so utilize that. Consumer insights to me are critical in young companies and people who are even moving out into the workforce. Okay, what are the consumers looking at? What are they looking for? Okay, and then you get a better you get a better sense of what you can do to meet that demand out there. So that's kind of, I don't know if I really answered your question, Joe, but those have been things that have been on my mind as in listening to this morning.
Oh, great insights, Mark. I do want to just come back to that question on sort of the availability of capital right now. And Megan, maybe you're closest to that. I mean, again, if somebody is an entrepreneur, they're thinking about launching a business, they've got a good idea, is the capital available right now?
Yeah, on the one side of that answer, there's more liquidity than ever before. I don't know if anybody's following the public markets, but it's most obvious there. Valuations, retail trading, it's unbelievable, and it's hitting our industry. The access to public markets, the ability to IPO. If these are really unusual things. If you look at Laird Superfood and Vital Farms and even Beyond Meat, it's unusual for natural products businesses that are of that size to be able to IPO and sort of continue to trade successfully. So that's indicative of how much liquidity exists and how much investors are looking for access to growth, natural products, ESG, better for you products. But you get all the way down to sort of the startup seed, and it is still very fragmented. Your first source of capital is your own social currency. It's getting someone to believe in you. You don't have a product, you don't have proof of concept. It's nothing but someone saying this person is going to do something great. And one of my mentors always said, if the strategy is going to be wrong, the goal of the entrepreneur is to solve for that strategy before it runs out of trust from the consumer, money, or time. And so if you're thinking of getting started with a business, I always say there's no easy way. There's no network that you hit up. There's no sort of seed fund that just exists. It's pure hustle. It's telling your friends how excited you are and slowly aggregating those checks and then being stewards of that financial resources really cautiously. I'm a big believer that capital has never successfully solved product market fit. Only you and the consumer can do that. And so the capital you need to raise is only so much to buy the inventory to get it in the hands of the consumer and then listen to them. What you don't want to raise is so much capital that you just fund past those mistakes, sort of subsidize your learnings for too long and miss the opportunity to really know how to adapt. So getting that first $500,000 to buy your minimum order quantities and get the product in the hands of the customer is a ton of work. But it's going to start sort of in your own social circle. It's going to start sort of in your broader network, and you raise it one small check at a time. Does that answer it? But it's there. People are funding it, and companies are getting funded every day at great valuations and continuing to raise capital through this cycle.
That's very encouraging. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to take one more pass at the employment side of this, and then we're going to shift and talk a little bit about where this industry is with its diversity and inclusion practices. But on the employment side, if there's at least two people from my class who are seniors, undergraduates right now, who are maybe looking at this industry, for our panelists, what resources or what strategies would you recommend that they tap into to try to find employment in this industry? Is it looking for jobs on corporate websites? Is it going through headhunters and recruiters? Is it talking to the folks at CESR? Is it direct networking like this? What do you think are the best resources? And I know Steve posted a link earlier in our chat column about some resources, but where would you guide our attendees if they want to try to find jobs in this industry? So David, maybe I'll start that with you and Steve second.
Sure. We actually just hired two folks on my team in a kind of support roles. And so I've got a little bit of kind of fresh experience looking at the job market right now from that perspective. And, I would say, if you've just got one strategy, that's not enough. You should be doing lots of the things that Joe just rattled off. You should be, for sure, doing direct networking. You should set some target companies and checking their direct listings pretty frequently. And just having as many kind of current conversations as you possibly can. I would say that from our perspective, especially me being on kind of the kind of service provider end of things, if you're interested in natural foods, there's lots of great kind of hands on the ground learning, feet on the ground learning that you can do through brokers, distributors, retail. There's so much like invaluable learning that you get from doing some of those jobs that are really super tactical to start with, like getting an item on the shelf and making sure that it's faced, building a display, understanding what a distribution network is. What does it take to get an item into a DC and then into a store. All of that sort of stuff feels like maybe like basic blocking and tackling, maybe a little less sexy than, you know, being the e-com manager for a brand, but is so important when you're interviewing for jobs after that, that you really understand what the ecosystem looks like. And so I'd say, you know, just, you know, making sure, of course, that you're having lots of conversations, but really thinking about, you know, where are there broad sets of opportunities out there? And a lot of times it is on the service provider end of things.
Steve, some thoughts to share on this topic? Need to unmute.
My agency, Compass Natural, is a service provider. But I don't think I would have gotten here if I didn't follow a thread through the long arc of my career. And also the experience I built working with some different companies in the natural products industry is not to be underestimated. You know, we kind of have two markets here. We have this like B2B market where I work with clients that then either sell to other wholesale buyers or to consumers. And then you've got the CPG market, you know, which is really what the natural products market is. So, you know, I think thinking about a career over time, it could be like I wasn't really big on me becoming a salesperson, but working for Arrowhead Mills, which is a brand of the Celestial seasoning, the Hain Celestial group, I learned sales, and that's been very, very valuable in everything else I've done, and also how I interact with my clients, because marketing has to serve sales. But I wouldn't know that unless I went and kind of did my journeyman time doing it. You know, same with writing. I kind of backed into that with New Hope. I was writing as an extension agent for the Philadelphia newspapers and got a job with New Hope. But what I found is writing has been a skill that is worth honing, whether it's your business plan, your annual report. Don't underestimate, you know, honing your writing skills. I think that those are some fundamentals. I work with influencers. So, you know, what's your thread? We try to get earned media for company. My thread is health and the environment. I thought I was going to be a doctor early on, you know. Then I realized that working in the natural products industry, you'll find people kind of stick in it, though they work with different companies, but they're building a long arc of a career that is mission based. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to natural and organic is you share a sense of mission. For me, it's health. It's definitely the environment. You know, which angle do you want to come in? Do you want to work with media and influencers? What's the bridge where new land is being built? You know, you got the ocean, and where Mark is, you got some lava coming down. There's a lot of hiss and cross currents, but that's where the opportunity is. That's the new land being built. So is it experience in tech and online digital marketing and food? And you know, that goes two ways. What online applications can you apply with food? Or like in Silicon Valley, they're applying a lot of technology to come up with unique vegan, plant-based products. Questionable in my opinion, because they're still highly processed and they use GMOs and pesticides. And that's where we turn to where food has a role in climate change. Where's the bridge there that the next leadership generation is going to help? And I think it's critical. I mean, we just saw what happened in Texas. Maybe it's a great opportunity to come up with a cheap winterizing for solar panels down there, you know, and sell that in Texas. There's where the opportunities are, the bridge where I think new land is being built, and where technology and online marketing and sales meet food. And then are you interested in nutrition and dietary supplements? Because there's a lot of activity there, and the CBD world in Colorado has certainly accelerated that. Somebody asked a question about launching a food business or a beverage business. it takes some investment, but if you're willing to bootstrap it, it can be done. I know a small canner at one of these co-manufacturing places in Longmont who's canning for other small beverage makers that are emerging. So where there's a will, there's a way. Of course, when I'm hearing about investment too, it's that catch-22, right? Companies or investors want you to have experience, but how do you get experience? How are they going to invest in you if you don't have a track record? So if you do and are nurturing a product idea, as Ibrahim had mentioned, a good time is now, because you're not building so much that you might lose so much if you start. But the other thing is you might want to nurture that idea and go work in the industry and get some experience and come back to your idea, and knowing a little more about what I heard others say, sales, marketing, cost of goods sold, your budgets, how the distributors are taking, promotional funds away from you and how to control that, et cetera. So it's a really good marketplace. I think going into the future, health, immunity, taking care of ourselves, this is where the innovation and the growth is in the food industry. So those are my thoughts.
Great, appreciate it. Go ahead, Ibrahim.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. I'm going to take 60 seconds because I want to share maybe a somewhat extreme perspective that I wish someone had shared with me earlier in my career, which is that most like online drop boxes or like general submission forms is not where you're going to get hired, right? So if you talk to someone at a small or medium-sized company, they're working their network. They're asking people, hey, who do you know who's done X, Y, or Z? They're looking at brands that they respect to see, okay, who did this for that person, right? And so like, I just feel like you'd be better served almost optimizing for the idea that, look, me submitting my resume is not going to get me a job. What is everything else that I could do to get that job? Whether that's cold emailing someone, working a network, someone started talking about content creation, right? Having a blog, having a, some public portfolio, right? Like things of that nature are going to get you a job a lot easier than I think the very traditional cover letter and resume. And so I just wanted to share that 2 cents.
Sage advice. Go ahead, Betty.
Just really quickly, I mean, if you haven't taken a marketing, communication, brand building class, like go do it, because you are your own brand, right? This is the way the world works these days. You're your own influencer. You have to show up with a perspective and an outlook and thoughts. And so, with some training, you'll build a strategy against specific audiences that best align with your strengths and your points of difference, and sort of learn the tactics, whether it's blogging or sort of LinkedIn posting or building micro communities of like-minded networks that somehow expand your network. I mean, you sort of figure out what your competitive advantage is and build your own recruiting strategy behind that. And really think about it through that lens of like yourself as your own brand and what you can bring to the employer of choice.
I wanted to share this magazine and have to take a look at the date. Where's the date on it? December 11, 1970. And it says, organic food, new and natural. Mark, did you ever meet this person, Gunilla Knudsen? She was a model. So this is 50 years ago, kind of when Mark Retzlaff first got started. But Life magazine, organic food, new and natural, December 1970. We've come a long way. We've seen a birth of an industry. I don't want people to underestimate the potential in the cannabis and hemp space either. We think that's got a role in natural medicines, in regenerative agriculture, and we're seeing IPOs happen there. And certainly that's another new industry that's being birthed in our time.
So let me pick up on your magazine cover there, Steve, because although I couldn't see it all that clearly, it does raise this interesting question of women's role in this industry. And I don't know whether that particular version was objectification or utilization for sure, but it is an interesting observation that in this industry, women make up the clear majority of jobs, but not at the top. As in most industries, that glass ceiling hangs pretty low. There's not that much equity, not that much ownership. The middle management ranks are well filled out with women and probably less so with people of color. So I'd be very curious to hear from our panelists what you think where does this industry stand in our sort of modern reckoning of equity and racial justice? And is that an opportunity or is that a problem for us right now? I'm just sort of open that up to all our panelists, but would love to hear some different perspectives on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to start with this one just because it's a topic that I spend a lot of time thinking about. We launched an organization actually to address some of these very questions, Project Potluck, earlier this fall. You know, first and foremost, just like ground people on the numbers, you know, about 40% of the US population identifies as being a person of color. And I'm going to speak specifically about, you know, racial and ethnic diversity. And about 15% of company boards in the natural product industry are comprised of people of color, right? So if we just take that as like one disparity point, right? 40% of the population, 15% of company boards. If you look at leadership teams, it's a very similar dynamic, right? And I think personally, it's a pretty complex path to how we got here from, you know, socioeconomic issues, historical brands and leaders in the space, right? Like some of these things are just kind of snowballs that build on themselves. But I think it's a huge opportunity, right? You know, one of the cool things about CPG in particular is that these are products that people use every day. They're very intimate. They're in their homes, right? They reflect their identity in many ways. And so, you know, I think it's important that brands and products speak to kind of the full fabric of, you know, the US population. And so I think it's a huge opportunity. And I think more so than even just the teams, like I'm very excited about the brands and the products themselves, providing innovation, providing marketing, right? Even you just go to your favorite brand, scroll through their Instagram page and see like, okay, does this look like a reflection of America or, you know, a very small and homogenous subset of it, right? So I think it's a huge opportunity. I think it's an area that we can improve. And I think founders and leaders can play a big role in that. So I'll pause there just to set the table, but happy to dive back in.
Yeah, I think I can piggyback on that from sort of the responsibility of capital perspective, because I think it ties in as well. But I love what Ibrahim said around, you know, brands being willing to show up visually to different consumers, thinking about price. Like, I think one of the Achilles heels of the natural products industry is we keep launching premium price point products. You know, we add more chia and the cost goes up and we have a food access problem. And so, you know, really being self-aware in this industry around where we're being exclusive, even as we try to forward other positive initiatives of change. There's still sort of an element, right, of access and inclusivity that we often don't talk about just in the nature of the products we're bringing to market. But capital plays a big role here, I think, in where there's been significant funding, where there's been significant innovation, and you know, the composition of capital reflects that of sort of the top of the organizations. It's disproportionately white, it is disproportionately male, and as capital partners, we use our instincts, right? We use our own pattern recognition, we use our own experiences to inform where we invest. And so if you sort of take that and extrapolate it to therefore what gets the funding, you can see how certain populations are undervalued or excluded, how certain consumer sectors or segments are undervalued or excluded because they're not represented in the decision makers at the capital side. And so there's a lot of work we have to do from an allocator side to say, how are we making sure that we don't have huge blind spots around where the growth opportunities are, how you bring those to life and resource them, and we're not continuing to disproportionately fund sort of certain segments and opportunities at the expense of others. And so I think there's been quite a lot of work done on this, in particular at the sort of board level, really trying to amplify the diversity of boards. It's a great place to start because it's sort of the easiest place to start in some ways. I think the next layer down will be on the GP side of capital partnerships, which is structurally much more challenging. These contracts are 10 years at a time, right? There's a lot of wealth tied up in them, and that'll be the real push for the industry is sort of you know, sharing wallet, right, with new partners to change the composition of capital.
David, any thoughts on this from your perspective or from Spin's perspective?
Sure. You know, and I feel very fortunate that I've had the pleasure of working for a couple of extremely strong women leaders and people of color in my career. But I would also recognize that this is not it's not necessarily a new thing that the natural products industry has been kind of wrestling with this. It's been a conversation, including, equity in general, including food deserts and pricing sorts of issues that is struggled with over the last 20, 30, 40 years. But I think it's also important to recognize that just wrestling with it isn't enough. And I think that's really been kind of more of a turning point, I would say, in the last 5 years or so, is that it's turned from maybe there's a panel on it at Expo West that people attend and talk about, to something a lot more proactive, where you do see, from the ground up, more organizations trying to tackle the issues head on, which I think is a really positive thing for our industry. I'm really glad to see a lot, it's for an industry based on action, kind of did a lot of talking in a lot of these areas for a long time and not doing a lot of acting. And I'm super pumped to see a lot of that changing.
That's a great sensitivity there. I think this industry is so self-reflective and it's so analytical, and we feel very righteous a lot of times that we have been fighting for causes and missions and things that are bigger than just profits. And yet we've not done a good job on this front. We've really been blinded to it. And I love your description of that, yeah, there's been lots of panels to attend, but those have stopped short of action. And it feels to me right now like we are perhaps at an inflection point. Steve, I know you've got some thoughts on this as well.
It's something I've always thought of, and certainly have seen this in the natural products industry. I served as editor of the Natural Foods Merchandiser. It's the biggest trade magazine in the natural products industry. And today I serve as editor of letstalkhemp.com. I'll send that. It's a news source. We have to work really hard to make sure that women, people of color, Native Americans are represented in the news. So I actually work really hard to get articles from Winona LaDuke, Muriel Young Bear, Felicia Dawson, a Black gynecologist, MD, who's a specialist in the endocannabinoid system, Cheryl Murray Powell, who's a Black attorney and head of the Florida Agriculturalists Association, specializes in hemp and cannabis. I really strive. It takes, I'm saying this humbly, equal opportunity takes extra effort to make it happen. And I will say there is one area where women dominate, and that's in the influencer market. Interestingly enough, and there's also, I serve on the advisory board of what I feel is one of the most diverse groups of healthy lifestyle influencers. It's a group called ShiftCon, and you can go to their website at shiftconmedia.com. The CEO is a woman of color, Ari Adams, and their conferences are among the most diverse. And I really think this is a diamond in the rough for brands to work with this group of influencers, especially at a time of pandemic when product trial is challenging because you can't demo in the stores. So what's today's word of mouth? Today's word of mouth is the influencers. And I'm proud and honored to be involved with the ShiftCon network and to do what we do at letstalkhemp.com to make sure that voices of all diversity are being shared. I will say in the hemp space, I find it interesting. There are a lot of women entrepreneurs in the hemp space, but similarly, you've got a lot of that middle management stuff. So, we're here on the media side, just try to continue to give voice, because that's what's going to make it happen more.
Yeah. Well, we've got just a couple of minutes left here, and I know Justine is going to do a quick wrap up for us, but I just want to go rapid fire one more time through our panelists here and just say, biggest takeaway at this point from this year of pandemic lockdown, washing your groceries in the sink, all of that stuff. As you think about this for our remaining audience members here who are looking at careers in this industry, what is the biggest takeaway from the last year that they should have? Let me start with you, David. Put you on the spot.
My biggest takeaway is that, you know, things have changed permanently, and things will continue to change. And I think you should value that in a lot of ways because it creates a lot of opportunity. You know, we were talking a little bit about a drive to be an entrepreneur, and you know, whether or not you've got that or you've got the idea. If you're generally a problem solver, great time for you, because there's lots of opportunity at any size company to be solving problems because everyone's got them right now. I would also say, you know, the world has changed a lot and it also hasn't, right? Even if online groceries make up 20% of all sales within 5 years, that still means 80% of groceries are being bought in a store, whether that's a traditional grocer, could be alternative channels, could be all sorts of places. But you know, it's very easy to overreact and over project things, but taking stock of what it means for you in the future should hopefully open up just a ton of opportunity for people.
Okay, lightning round answers. We've got only 90 seconds left here. Steve, big takeaway from this last year.
You know, it's been a year of doing what you can to build resilience, doing something every day you can for yourself. It's been challenging. I have some good days and I have some days where I don't know if it's Tuesday, Wednesday, or Blur's Day. So be really kind to yourself. We are going to emerge. But certainly this space of natural organic health, and you know, we're worried about the climate change, about the pandemic right now. I challenge and ask people to take a look at where they can create business opportunities where food and environmental resilience, community resilience, and climate change. This is the 800-pound in the gorilla in the room for us in the future. But again, crisis creates opportunity. So you guys are going to be heading into that with solutions more than some of us that have helped, you know, further the natural and organic products industry to this point.
Thank you, sir. Megan?
I would say sort of permission to do a full, thorough audit of your values and priorities and like ruthlessly rationalize and reorganize accordingly. It's such a unique year in terms of your ability to really let go of shoulds. You know, I should be going to that networking event. I should be taking that class. I should be pursuing this. I should keep this retail location open. You know, you sort of in this year of chaos, you can eliminate a lot of those shoulds, come out the other side much more decisive, much more focused, much happier, without a lot of people noticing that you've sort of reorganized almost everything. So, you know, take the time that's being given where you might normally have done something else with it, and really sort of spend time on that.
Thank you very much. And last word to you, Mr. Basir.
I don't know if I deserve the final spot, but I think the thing that hasn't been hit on is just this idea around like team structure, remote working, flexibility of your schedule, flexibility of your day. That's been one of my biggest revelations over the last year. I've considered hires and made hires that I never would have considered a year ago from a location perspective. I've raised money without ever meeting the investors face to face, you know, like just crazy things that I wouldn't have predicted. And so I would give yourself permission to, again, think very differently about how you structure your time, your day, your location, etc.
Terrific. Okay, Justine, you can wrap a bow on it all.
Well, I want to thank our panelists today. That was an extraordinarily interesting conversation. I got a lot of private messages in my chat about how much people were getting out of it. So thank you.